Welcome back, everyone. So, today we're talking about something that I do feel like every single person has heard about and has been hearing more about, probably has strong feelings about, and also, if we're going to be really honest, is still kind of figuring out. And that is boundaries. And before you roll your eyes at us or think you already know what we're going to say, I promise this is not going to be a lecture about just how to say no more often.
Because here's the thing, most of us know we should have boundaries. We've heard the word 1,000 times. It's all over therapy spaces and self-help books and Instagram captions, but knowing you should have them and actually building them in your real life with your real relationships and your real messy circumstances, that's a completely different story.
And it's so much harder in practice. And what I really want to talk about today is the honest version of that, the journey of actually getting there, because neither of us woke up one day with healthy boundaries just perfectly set in place. It was a process. It was uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable. It still is because it's still ongoing. And I think all of us that do try to put boundaries in place, it's this constant practice of doing so.
And we're also going to get into some really tangible things you can actually start doing. Not a to do list, not another thing to feel guilty about if you don't do it perfectly, but real starting points that feel human and attainable.
And we're going to talk about what boundaries actually are because I think that word has gotten so watered down that it means everything and nothing at the same time.
Okay, let's get into it.
So, what boundaries actually are and what they are not. I want to start here because I think there's a version of boundaries that gets taught that actually makes people feel worse. Like boundaries are this aggressive thing that you do to people. You put up walls, you say no to everything, you protect yourself by keeping people out and like shutting people out.
And that's actually not it. That's armor. That's not a boundary, that's a shutdown. And I think a lot of people either swing to that extreme or they go the other direction and they have no limits whatsoever. And they're just hemorrhaging their own energy in every direction and wondering why they feel depleted all the time.
I mean, a boundary is really just a line that defines what works for you and what doesn't. Like, I really think when you put it into those terms, it feels a little bit more attainable. It's more simple. It's not about punishing other people or being difficult. It's about knowing yourself well enough to say, this is okay for me and this is not. And then just honoring that, which I think that's the hardest part. And I've really had to learn not to make it about someone else. Like, it's actually about myself.
Which sounds so reasonable when you say it like that. But then when you try and actually do it with somebody who's close to you in your day to day life, suddenly it's the hardest thing that you've ever attempted.
Yes, I completely agree, and I think that's because boundaries, they're relational. They exist in the context of other people, even though we say, like, okay, make it about you and not the other person. It is still in the context of other people. And other people, they do have feelings, they do have expectations, and they do have their own histories. And sometimes when you set a boundary, it can rock a boat in ways that do feel really uncomfortable.
And I think that discomfort is actually the thing that stops most people before they even get started. Not because they don't need to set boundaries, but because the short term discomfort of setting one feels bigger than the long term cost of not having one. Plus, I think so many of us tend to stray away from situations that just don't feel good inside. And if we've been taught over time not to set boundaries, that setting up a barrier to other people is essentially turning that person off, I think there can be a really negative connotation with that.
I feel like you get to this point though that you become so depleted or resentful or disconnected from yourself that you get to this point where you're like something has to change. And that's usually where the real boundary work begins, and it's not from a place of health typically, but it's typically from a place of like, okay, I've had enough. I need to change this.
Yeah, and I think sometimes for a lot of us, this conversation has become a little bit more common. We talked about it earlier. You see it on social media, you see it out in the world. Boundary has almost become a, I don't want to say like a catchphrase, but a popular term that people are familiar with. And
Trendy.
yeah, right. So, but putting it into practice is incredibly difficult. And I'm curious, I mean, you say that, you know, you kind of reach a breaking, like you gave the example of reaching a breaking point before you set a boundary. Do you find that that's been true for you, Catherine, in your life? Like, give us some examples of what a moment or the season was where you realized that something in your life had to shift.
Gosh. I can think of a few, and I do need to, never know who's listening, and I do need to be careful because I don't wanna put, like, anyone in my life on blast or, like, that I have, put up boundaries with because, like we've talked about, they are relational, and on the other side of that boundary, even though it's not a wall, they are people, right? And gosh, I feel like I also can't talk about boundaries without being completely honest too, because it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? But what I can say is that there have been relationships in my life where I just started noticing something. I didn't like who I was around certain people. It had nothing to do with like n- it wasn't who they were, right? It was who I was when I was with them, how I felt after spending time with them, if I walked away from like a dinner with someone and I felt anxious or drained or feeling like worse than when I arrived of spending time with someone, but I just kept showing up anyways because that's what you do. These people become familiar with you. And I didn't really have the understanding or the language of what that actually was at the time. So it was more of just this feeling of like, I don't really like how I feel after spending time with this person or people or group or, whoever it was. And don't get me wrong, I love a good gossip session as much as the next person. Like, I can gossip. But when that's the only thing that holds a relationship together, and that is like what a connection is built on for me, I don't know, I can't really do that anymore. It doesn't feel fun to me anymore, and it just I don't know, I need more depth in my relationship these days, I think, and so I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but yeah, it started to become more about how I felt after spending time with certain people.
Well, and can I ask you a question too? You talk about like gossiping and all of that. I don't know about you, but when I am around those who do tend to do that more, I find one, I tend to do that more. And that's a trait that I personally don't like about myself. But then I also get a level of anxiety that, oh man, they're probably talking about me too. Like what do they actually think about me? And I think that it becomes more difficult the older you get because you just crave real, authentic, honest relationships.
100%, yeah, and I will I will always gossip about reality TV. Like, those people, I know they're real people, but that is something, like, I will
But they're
always
not
talk
your
about.
people.
I don't personally know them. They are not actually my friends. So gossiping about reality TV, I do not actually even consider gossiping. What I have learned in my adulthood on my journey of becoming just a better human being in general is when I am gossiping about other people that I know or something like that, and it makes me feel icky inside, it's because I feel like that's just a projection of how insecure I am, and I've gotten to this place of feeling much better about myself and, like, loving myself and not needing to do that. I'm not saying everyone that gossip, like, doesn't love themselves. That's not what I'm saying, but I do think it comes from this place of some sort of deeper rooted thing that that person needs to deal with, and that used to be me, though. Like, I used to do that all the time because I did not feel great about myself.
Definitely. And I think too, it also can be like a cultural thing, right? Like I think growing up in smaller communities, that tends to be a little bit more prominent because it's everybody's up in each other's business. And it is just
Mhm.
kind of part of that. And I think, when I look at boundaries in my own life, I find that the times in which I've recognized that I have to put them up and establish more of that because I'm like you. I mean, it took me a long time to one, recognize that I needed boundaries and two, actually put them into place. And they do change and vary depending on the person. It's not always related to gossip, it's related to just general feeling within myself. And I think the friendships that I have where I've had to put up some kind of boundary is where I've become almost too easy to access. Like I've created an environment in some friendships where I allow so much energy within to get sucked out into a negative space. And I think I personally feed off of other people's energy. And so when I have relationships where the person tends to be super negative or they're talking about other people negatively a lot, it definitely brings my energy levels down. And so I find myself needing to set some boundaries there, or maybe even just like not respond or respond. Like if it's a text about somebody else, for example, respond very generic. So then it's, because you want to validate your friends' feelings. You don't want them to feel bad about sharing something with you because it sometimes to them may not just be gossip. Maybe it's more meaningful than that, or to you, it feels that way. So it is a little bit more complex, but I think boundaries come in all different forms. And you just have to kind of make sure to protect your peace and kind of set something up that can help you do that.
It takes a lot of work to not let other negative energy affect your own.
Definitely.
Like, that's I mean, that's very hard to do.
Absolutely. So I think kind of rolling into the next thing, just generally, like, where do you feel like these boundaries come from in general?
I know we've been getting a little deep already, but let's go a little bit deeper because I think if we just talk about what the boundaries are, we're starting to touch on why. Like, why does this feel so hard? That's the most important part. And the reason boundaries are so hard is not because we're weak or because we don't know better, it's because of where we learned or didn't learn to have them in the first
Yeah,
place.
so much of it really does go back to how we were raised, what was modeled for us, whether our needs were treated as valid or inconvenient, or whether the people in our lives treated their own needs as valid or inconvenient. I mean, I look at that a lot in just different family dynamics and can see how so much of the way in which we treat ourselves isn't just influenced by how we were treated, but how those in our lives also treated themselves, right? And being the model for that. Looking at, whether saying no was allowed or whether it came with consequences like emotional withdrawal, conflict, guilt.
If you grew up in an environment where your needs were kind of secondary or where keeping the peace just meant making yourself smaller, then boundaries didn't just feel hard. I mean, they felt pretty dangerous and pretty much non existent to even make that an option. And they felt, if you were in that situation, they felt like a threat to love and connection. If you put this boundary up or had anything like that in place, then there's going to be no love and connection.
Definitely. And it's so interesting. I will get into this, but I am at my core such a people pleaser. One of my aunts and I actually talk about this quite frequently because she considers herself the same and almost like feeling the sense of responsibility for other people's emotions. And so it's made it even more difficult for us to be able to set boundaries and speak up for ourselves because we fear that the repercussions of that are going to do like what you just said, Catherine. They're going to come in between us and somebody that we love. They're going to make us unlovable. They're going to, you know, change the dynamic in interactions with people who we really deeply care about. And I don't want to get too off in the weeds here, but I will say, like, as a parent, it is something that I find myself more and more aware of now because I mean, we all know in the chaos of parenting, especially when you have multiples and you're trying to get all of your kids on track to get out the door, to do this, to do that. And like everybody is losing their shit and like trying to speak up or say their opinion or, communicate what they consider to be their needs, where you as a parent are like, it does not matter right now. We have one goal. And like, I feel like,
Get out the door.
exactly. And in the everyday interaction, that like in these small moments, that doesn't turn your kid forever into a people pleaser. But I do think that if when we do those things, when we're thinking about that and we're a little bit more conscious of it with our, I think our generation is a little more conscious of it with our kids than maybe our parents were. And maybe understanding like our needs are just as valid when we were children as a small person as they are now as an adult, whether those needs aren't important to somebody else or not.
Yeah, I find myself in this situation too with my 2 girls. So, I am the second born daughter in my family, and I find we've talked about this, the difference between the first and second born, and how, if I want to get real deep here, this sense of, as the younger one, not living up to the expectation of my sister, or feeling left out, or just these things that kind of come with being the second born. And she could say the same thing about like how I got, special treatment as being the younger one. You can go both ways with that. But I find myself with both of my girls, like, needing to be very mindful of how I treat them, and like not to put too much pressure on Ada as the older one, that, she should be doing X, Y, and Z, or babying Elena because she is the baby and I know how it feels to be the baby, and just things like that I've noticed in my own parenting.
No, I can completely relate to that, and even as an only child, I feel like I see it from different perspective even than my husband, who's the third, and can see things a little bit different. I think so many of our experiences that we have today and how we respond to them are so deeply rooted in our own experiences that we have as children. And I think one of the things about boundaries that does make it scary as an adult, just as much as it did whenever you were a kid, is that you can think about setting a boundary intellectually and you can know that it's going to be okay. You can talk about it and you can use your words, and I could tell you about, a relationship I have and being able to set that type of boundary and know that it's going to be okay. But the feeling that you have in your body whenever you do that is scary. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety that is associated with it. And ultimately, it's also just uncomfortable. And so I think that that feeling in itself can prevent people from doing it in the first place because they associate that with it being the wrong thing to do. When really, it may be just uncomfortable and you just need to work through it.
The head and the body are on completely different timelines with this kind of stuff. I think you can be totally clear in your mind that you have every right to this boundary, and still feel sick to your stomach the moment you actually like try to actually set it.
Yeah, because sometimes, like I said, discomfort really is just newness.
Mhm.
It's kind of like when you walk into a room with a lot of people and you don't know them and you're kind of forced to put yourself out there in a way. It doesn't feel comfortable, but that's because you've never been in that situation with those people before. So even though it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's still necessary.
Yeah, I think that's a great reframe. Growth, I mean, you hear this all the time, right? Growth is uncomfortable, at least at first. And setting a boundary that you've never set before with someone that you love in a relationship that matters, I mean, it's brave and it deserves to be treated that way. But yeah, it's going to feel uncomfortable.
So looking back, Catherine, on your life, what did it feel like the first time that you set a boundary that really counted? Like, was it scary? Was it like, I mean, obviously it had to be big to stick out to you. And just, what phase of your life were you in? How old were you? Tell us a little bit about it.
Mm. Okay. Well, there's a big one that stuck out to me. I think I've told you about this, but there was a lot of, I had a lot of friendship relational drama kind of right before, during, and after my wedding. So back in 2019. And there were some friendships in there that I lost, and some were on like, my doing. But I was sick to my stomach and lost a lot of sleep over the situation for, I mean, well over a month, because this was like a really hard boundary fast. Like, we're not going to be in each other's lives anymore. Not like, I'm going to set a boundary to protect my peace, but like still tolerate you and like still have a relationship with you. This was like completely done. It was like a breakup, and it was devastating. I went through like a period of grief for sure. I was devastated, and going through grieving that, knowing that it's your own decision to do so, I think makes it a little extra hard too. But it didn't feel good. I can tell you that.
No, and I don't think they ever do. And I think in hindsight, sometimes you can kind of look back and see, like, yeah, that was necessary, but it can take a while. I mean, losing somebody in your life is really hard. Sometimes too, I don't know if boundaries necessarily have to be that
No, they
strong.
definitely
I
don't.
think
There's plenty of people in my life currently right now that I have boundaries in place that, like, they probably don't even know that I have boundaries in place with them. They probably can't even tell. And so there's all different kinds. I think that's just the one that stuck out to me because it was the most extreme and
yeah.
devastating.
I think the one that really counted for me, and I feel like it's not even really this just like I'm cutting you off moment. I really think it's more of this like internal shift that I experience. And it's, really been in the past couple, I don't know, probably like 5 years or so, where I realized I just couldn't keep being everything. I needed to set more boundaries within my life and with certain people to where I wasn't just accessible all the time because then I found myself always looking at my phone, texting while trying to work, while doing this, while doing that. And as somebody who struggles with hardcore ADHD and am all over the place, anyways, being able to focus and block off time is so important for my mental health, or else I never get anything done. So for me, it's really showed up in motherhood and business a lot. Like I built this version of myself where I was the person who could figure it out. I could take a last minute request. I could make it work. I could be flexible. I could absorb the inconvenience. I could say, oh, it's totally fine when like it absolutely was not fine. And honestly, for a long time, I thought that made me good. I made me a good mom, a good friend, a good business owner, a good partner. Like my value was tied to how much I could handle without making anybody else uncomfortable because as a really true people pleaser, I want to make sure my actions don't impact anybody else negatively. And then though I started to realize that every time I said yes when I meant no, I was not only building resentments, but if it was work related, I was doing a really shit job. Like it ultimately led me to not put as much effort in because I knew I didn't want to do something. It led me to feeling this internal angst about a situation. And so I had to start saying no. I mean, in business, one of the things is I used to do a lot of custom print orders for people. And not only that, we still do that, but there are very clear boundaries around it. As you know, Catherine, it's not like I'm going to sit down and design this whole big design for you. Because when I would do that, what I found is that not only would it be taken advantage of a lot, but I was never charging what it was worth to for my time in order to do that. And it was taking so much time for such little kickback that I cut that off. And I said, you know what? We're only doing it. Here are the fonts you can choose from. You tell us the words and we'll make it happen. But that's basically the extent of it here. And it's the same thing in like events in our space, collaborations. I had to turn down a collaboration with a company that's local that I adore and I love them so much. And they do a lot of great work here in the St. Louis area specific to moms. But ultimately, I knew I didn't have the capacity for it. And it's like, if I know that it's not going to make X amount within our business at this point, when it comes to product development and design, I just have to say no.
You can't.
Leah 2 years
You can't
ago
do
would
it.
have, I can't do it. I physically, mentally cannot do it. And so Leah 2 years ago would have drove herself freaking crazy doing it because she didn't want to say no. Leah today said, you know what? I can't. I want to be a giving person. I want to be thoughtful. I want to show up for people, but I also can't do that at the expense of becoming a version of myself that is exhausted and resentful and just disconnected to what I need.
Yeah, and what did you say to me today when you were gonna be late today?
I said, I am trying to be a time realist and not a time optimist because I am always, anyone who knows me knows that I am perpetually late. And I am trying to not, I mean, I'm always going to be a couple minutes late. That is something I will never do. But being 3 minutes late versus being 20 minutes late is a completely different thing in my book. And so I'm really trying to be like, no, I'm not going to get there in the next 15 minutes. We need to extend this out a little bit to give myself a little time. And then I could also grab a snack.
I had to stop for a snack with our the wholesale situation when you were like, "Yeah, I can get that order out today." You know what I told the customer? I said, "We'll get it out by the end of this week."
And you know what, Catherine implemented on our wholesale side was rush fees for that because you know who would continue to do this? Me. I would continue to do it without expecting anything from the customer. And I think we're kind of taught that the customer is always right, our parents are always right, other people are always right and to kind of push ourselves lower and not give our own needs the same value as we do of others. But she put a rush fee into place. And guess what? All these people who need their stuff rushed, they're more than willing to pay the extra amount to make it worth our time in order to do so.
But yes, I think you are becoming much better at becoming a time realist over
Trying
optimist
my best.
because it is what it is, right? We only have so much time in our day. Okay, where were we though? I feel like we went somewhere.
Yeah, we were talking about being like times in which we've set boundaries, but we're going to get into the guilt, we're going to get into the feelings behind that. But one thing I want us to touch on is being the person on the receiving end.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whenever we were in college, or maybe I had just like graduated, Adam's roommate and I and him, like the three of us, were really good friends. And, we went to college. I returned to college back in the same town that I grew up in. So a lot of people, it's not just we're meeting each other for the first time. We have these like deep rooted, long term relationships. And him and his roommate, I felt like at that point in their life, like that was kind of his soulmate. Like I was his girlfriend, but like that was his dude. And they hung out a lot. And so his roommate had never like he didn't have a girlfriend or anything. He was a great guy. I was always trying to like find girls for him, and I ended up finding someone I worked with. I connected them. They started dating. And I don't honestly remember what it was or what we did that made them that really hurt them. I mean, again, this is, we're talking about early 20s, and she was 18 or 19. She was younger than we were. So we were all very young, but I think I was probably talking about them. I'm sure they didn't want to hang out with us, or they were just like hanging out in his room by themselves or something stupid in hindsight. But I'm sure I talked about them behind their backs, and they found out, and it hurt them so much that they cut us off
The
entirely.
roommate and the girlfriend?
Yes.
Oh,
And we had mutual friends, and it was a situation where, I mean, theirs was so strong that when we would see them in public, like they would avoid us, her in particular.
what did you
It
say about
really,
them? Something
I don't
stupid you say when you're
know. It was
20?
so stupid. Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily feel like, and I'm sure they would say the same thing now, right? Like she's moved on. I will probably never see her
Did they
again in my
get
life, but
married?
no. Mm-mm. And we've seen multiple times, and it's like water under the bridge now. It's kind of like different, but this was like years of not being connected at all, to the point where like it took Adam and I moving away, getting married, having a baby, coming back home. And on our anniversary, the year after we had our daughter, we ran into him at a restaurant, and he sat down and talked with us for like 2 hours. Like nothing ever happened. And then it's been fine anytime we've seen him ever since. So it was, though, this moment, I think for them in their mind, though, that was setting a boundary, because I think their feelings were so hurt. And I mean, I'm sure I said something stupid. Like, I'm sure I blamed her for him not hanging out with us or something. And it probably really hurt her feelings. And I wasn't considerate. And I was just yapping and not thinking about the repercussions of that. So I think for me, though, that did really like put into perspective of how powerful our words are within relationships and with friends. And yeah, it was so long ago. Yeah, I was young and stupid. But at the same time, like, I also, whatever I said, and I'm sure Adam said too, really like cut off a relationship that was really super important to him. So, anyways, we definitely learned a lot from that.
Mm.
There are so many of us that also don't know how to deal with situations like that. And sometimes it can feel easier to just cut someone off and move on than having those uncomfortable, difficult conversations.
The one that I did cut off, we honestly didn't have a conversation about it until like years later. And it was after I had Ada. She actually reached out to me saying, "Congratulations, like you're going to be such a good mom," and really not understanding why we didn't talk anymore. And I was in a place where I could explain it. I mean, I didn't know that I had to, but everyone's perceptions of things can be so different. But to play along with that whole situation, being on the receiving end of another friend that completely cut me out of her life, which went hand in hand with this other it was a big thing. You know the story. I won't get into that for the
Yeah.
listeners, but maybe someday because it is quite interesting. But being on the receiving end, it was also devastating as well. I mean, you grieve on both ends, I think. And I think it's really easy for us, especially when we're younger, and I'd like to say more immature than we are now, being able to look at yourself and be like, what role did I play in this? What accountability can I take? How can I be a better person from this situation? Sometimes that takes time to get to that point. If we want to defend ourselves.
Well, and you're also speaking from a place of hurt. I mean, your feelings are hurt, your ego is hurt, whether you want to believe that or not. You're feeling, yeah, just overall sad. And so to be able to operate in that state of mind and clearly and responsibly, I think can sometimes be incredibly difficult. Also, depending on, your emotional maturity level. I think a lot of us were raised in environments where it wasn't always easy to talk through our feelings, and we weren't necessarily taught how to navigate those types of hard situations without completely removing ourselves. And you almost go into fight or flight mode where a lot of people choose flight
Mhm.
because fighting seems like you feel like you're going to make it worse or somehow it's going to be put back on you, when in the reality is like, I don't know about you, but some of my best relationships, Adam and I actually talked about this morning. Like, some of the strongest relationships you have in your life are with the people who you can have disagreements or you can almost have some type of conflict with, but then you work through it and you talk through things that maybe are a little uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, like, I know you're a good person, Catherine. You know I'm a good person. If we don't agree on something, we can talk through it and still know the other person's coming from a good place. And I feel like that when you are setting boundaries is an important thing to keep in mind, is that it's most of the time coming from a place of love for yourself and for the other person.
Yeah. Have we had a disagreement yet?
No, not really. I mean, maybe I'm sure it'll come, and I'm sure it's more of like, Leah, you dropped the ball on this or something. Like, what are you doing? But I do.
Leah was, hesitant to do a podcast with me because she was like, "I just feel like I'm gonna let you down somehow, and I don't wanna ruin our friendship." And I was like, "Even if you do something that pisses me off, like, I still love you, and we're gonna be just fine."
That could be its own
But
podcast all about the fear of letting people down.
people pleaser, that's because 'cause you're a people pleaser. But I
Mhm.
think going back to the flight or fight thing, flight or fight or flight.
Fight or
Why
flight,
did I
yeah.
say that weird? I said it backwards. Anyways, that's what I knew how to do because I didn't know how to talk about feelings, and to be honest, at 35, I am still, like, just learning how to really talk about my feelings.
Yeah, well, and I think that kinda leads us into the next part
Mhm.
of it, which is the guilt piece of everything, right? Like, I think we should talk about that because guilt, in my brain, is the number one thing that makes people either not set boundaries in the first place or immediately cave on them when they do.
Yeah, I mean, when you set a boundary, you feel good about it for like 45 minutes, right? And then that guilt starts to creep in, and suddenly you start to convince yourself you were being too harsh, or did I really need to do that? Am I overthinking it? Maybe I should just let it go. I mean, it's really easy
Yeah.
to go there.
It is, and the guilt just gets louder when the boundary is with someone that you do love, because if you didn't care about the person, it wouldn't feel like guilt, it would just feel like a decision. Guilt means that there is love involved, which is very complicated.
So, I guess, I mean, how do you hold both? Like, how do you love someone deeply and still say, this does not work for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reframe that's helped me the most is understanding that a boundary is not necessarily an act of rejection. It's an act of honesty. That requires us to step a little bit outside of our own body and gain a little bit of perspective too, right? Like, sometimes when you set a boundary, you're basically telling them what's true for you. And it's not always about them. And I think we as humans tend to take that type of feedback as criticism and get personally offended, when really it's more someone trying to explain what the dynamics of the relationship that can shift in order to make it more comfortable and better for them, or basically expressing their own needs. And I think the relationship that can hold that truth is actually a stronger relationship than the one built on you pretending that you're fine when you're not. it kind of goes back to what I was saying, right? Like when you have conflict in relationships, you overcome something hard, you talk about the deep stuff, the hard stuff, the uncomfortable stuff. That relationship feels so much more real and substantial than when you hold things back and you don't actually move forward in
And
them.
then you get in your own head and it causes you more stress, more anxiety, and then it just becomes this whole bigger thing, like, in your own head. That happens to me sometimes. And I know we touched on this too, but I think there's something that needs to be said about the difference between guilt and grief, because sometimes what we feel when we set a boundary, it actually isn't guilt, it can be grief. And it's grief that the relationship isn't what we actually wished it was, grief that someone doesn't respond the way that we hoped, grief that doing the right thing for yourself like still comes at a cost. And I definitely just think that there is a distinction between those two.
Yeah, that distinction really hits, and I've never thought about it that way. That's a great point because if it is grief, you can let yourself feel it without taking it as a sign that you were wrong. Grief really is just love with nowhere to go for a minute. It manifests itself in so many different things. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you made the wrong call. I think it's also the realization that the relationship you had before you set that boundary or you did the thing has now shifted. So you're moving on to a different phase, and that relationship ultimately is probably not going to be the same, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it can bring about a lot of the feelings.
Yeah, and I think if you as a listener, if you're in any type of situation like this, I think it's worth asking yourself, whose voice is that guilt in? Like, when the guilt does show up, if you listen to it, who does it sound like? Because sometimes it's not even our own voice. It's a parent, it's an old conditioning, it's someone who taught us a long time ago that our needs were an inconvenience. And so sometimes that voice isn't even your own, and you almost need to like do this rewiring of like, I'm the one that's in control in this situation here.
Yeah, those voices really are so internalized that over time they start to feel like ours. And that really is why therapy, journaling, even just slowing down enough to question the thought, all of that matters because you're essentially fact checking something you've believed for a really long time.
Now to like just kind of switch subjects here a little bit, but I feel like I really started to embrace protecting my peace when I became a mom. And I want to spend a little bit of time here specifically on motherhood because I think being a mom adds this whole extra layer to the boundary conversation that is unique. And I just don't think we talk about it enough, like everything on this podcast.
Because there is this dominant cultural story that says a good mother is infinitely available. She's always on, she's always patient, always putting her kids first, always there. And most of us absorb that story so completely that trying to have needs as a mom feels almost like a betrayal of the job.
I have definitely felt that specific flavor of guilt where I want time to myself, or I want to not be touched for 5 minutes, or I want to have a conversation that isn't about what snacks my child is demanding from me. And immediately there's this voice that says, you wanted this, you should be grateful. What kind of mother needs a break from her kids? And for me personally, that voice is long gone, but when I first became a mom, that definitely was there all the time.
Yeah, and I think same for me. I felt it so much stronger in early motherhood where I constantly felt like I had to be available to everyone, but also infinitely available to my child. And I think the answer to that question of what mother needs a break from her kids is honestly every single one. We all need a moment. And it's not a character flaw. It's not a sign that you love your kids any less, but it is a sign that you're human and you have a self that exists outside of that role.
We talk about this all the time. I mean, can you answer the question of who are you outside of your roles or your titles? And I think this is where the peace protection piece becomes so connected to that self love conversation that we have had in the past, because you cannot protect something that you don't believe you deserve. And I am here to tell you that you definitely do deserve that. Everyone does.
Yeah, and if somewhere deep down you believe that your needs are less important than everyone else's in your family, no boundary strategy in the world is going to stick. The work has to go both ways, the inner belief and the outer action.
For you, Leah, what does protecting your peace look like for you practically, like in the day to day of being a mom?
For me, protecting my peace as a mom has become really practical because if it stays this vague idea of I need more time for myself, it just doesn't happen. It has to be like, what does that actually look like on a Tuesday when I'm getting home from work? I get everybody from school. Someone has practice or a softball game, which, as Catherine knows, has consumed our life for the past several months.
I feel
Someone
consumed by the softball games, and I don't even live in the same state as you.
That to me, especially right now in this day-to-day life, has been very, very consuming. And I think because my work and my home feels so intertwined all the time because I'm constantly shifting between the two, that I've had to ask myself in general, between motherhood and between Polish Prince and just all of it, like, what do I need to not lose my mind today? Like, not in a dramatic way, but in a very honest, real way. And sometimes that looks like me telling my kids, like, hey guys, I need 5 minutes where nobody talks to me. Just give me a second. And I used to feel really guilty saying that because I didn't ever want them to feel like I don't want them to talk to me. I love the relationships I have with my kids and I love being a sounding board for them. But what I'm realizing in that is actually better for them to see me name my needs out loud calmly than to watch me push past every limit and then snap. And sometimes it looks like me not making the most magical version of everything. I mean, I still have the tendency when it comes to like birthdays and stuff to go a
Yeah,
little
you
bit
do.
too overboard. Because I do, I love creating these magical moments for them. I feel like that's something that, like, no slight to my parents, they created a lot of wonderful things in my childhood for me, but like that is not something that was ever a thing. And that to me is like so beautiful and it makes it feel so special. And the whole day is about them. So I like go above and beyond in these different areas. And I try and do things like, I volunteer at their schools, but I'm not going to be the one who volunteers at every single event. I'm going to do that a couple times a year and then I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to take some time whenever I'm at work during the day to like take a couple breaths. Catherine knows that on occasion I fit in my little bit of thrifting time in the morning on a Monday or a Tuesday when the store is closed. And like that to me does feel like my moment to myself. Or after the kids go to bed and Adam and I are hanging out, that's when I've introduced some of the crafting that I've talked about in the past, where I've done the hand embroidery or basically just things where like I can protect my peace. But I'm not going to lie, I'm also going to throw my kids in front of a screen sometimes when I just need a moment to get something done and to recollect. That is protecting my peace, is kind of integrating these little moments where I get that, where I get a bit of silence and no one asking me for anything, because whether I'm at work or whether I'm at home, I constantly feel like someone is talking to me and I have to pay attention and I have to listen and I get very overstimulated. And I think it's okay to let whatever it is that you're doing be good enough and to remember that you don't have to be everything all the time. I know I'm like going on and on about
Wrap it up.
this, but um, I think too, when I'm at capacity, instead of pretending that I'm fine until I'm absolutely not fine, I do allow myself to say done is better than perfect and not overdo it. Ultimately, that really is just communicating and staying organized. If I find things to be really chaotic, I get very chaotic. If I'm just like going through the motions and churning out work, I get burnt out. It is trying to stay on top of it, incorporating intentional moments into the day to day because I love being a mom. I love my work, and I just don't want those things to require me to completely abandon myself. I don't think that's what our kids need from us either. I think they need to see the moms who love them deeply, but also have limits, needs, feelings, and a life inside of themselves too.
Because that's going to teach them to do the same, as they get older too, and that their needs are important as well. Right now, their needs are like everything and nothing else matters. But I do think that's such a great example to set. Something for me with when it comes to protecting my peace, and you are a mom, it is possible to weave those intentional moments into your day, into things you're already doing. It doesn't need to be this big production. My mornings are sacred to me. Like that is just the time for myself. I need that solitude, whether it's 5 minutes or 45 minutes because depending on the day and when Miss Elena wakes up and comes storming downstairs, it changes all the time. And I think being flexible with yourself of what actually does help you protect your peace, let it change, let it evolve, let it be different, let it be flexible. Like it doesn't need to be this rigid structure. I've been thinking a lot about mom guilt lately, and a question I ask myself is when do I have the most mom guilt? I have the most mom guilt when I snap at my kids. I have the most mom guilt when I'm not able to be present because I'm so overstimulated and thinking about all of these other things. Why do I get snappy and not present with them when I'm so overstimulated? Is because my nervous system is just in overdrive and out of whack. So, should I feel guilty about taking 5 to 10 minutes to go do some breath work to like regulate myself? I'm not gonna feel guilty for that because it actually makes me a better mom, and I'm not gonna feel guilty because I'm gonna be less snappy, I'm gonna be able to be present. So for me, my, like, self-care and my, like, self-regulation is a non-negotiable for me because it I just feel like makes me be a better person.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this so much about weaving that into your everyday life in small ways. One thing I do want to ask you though that hit me whenever you were talking, and I'd never thought about it this way, is like you and I sit here and we talk about this. We both have prioritized holding on to parts of ourselves and setting boundaries in order to do that, setting up our lives in a way where that is a priority. But I meet and know so many moms in my own life and my like close friends who they are, I would consider them to be some of the most selfless women I know. Like they that is not as much of a priority for them as it is to meet their kids' every needs and do that, which is also very admirable in its own way. So I don't want to say this in any way that speaks of that negatively because I also see that in the way in which they give themselves. But I think we also both had moms that prioritized things for themselves, right? Like I mean, your mom always worked. My mom always worked. My mom has always, like, she listens to this. So she's not going to be offended when I say this. We've had this conversation so many times, but she has always, like, really prioritized parts of herself in a way that I've resented at times. But I have also, like, looking at it from this perspective, I also respect, you know what I mean? And in its own way, because I think that that's kind of helped her blossom and become who she is today.
You said you had a question for me, though. Is there a question there for me?
I was going to ask when you look at your childhood and your own mom, how do you see the ways in which she prioritized her own needs?
For me, it hasn't done that. I think I think for me personally, yes, I did have a mom that threw herself into work. After my dad died, that is like that's where she went. That was her thing. I think that was like her outlet of where she put her grief. And not saying that she was a bad mom by any means. She did her very best with what she was given as a single parent, which I can't even imagine. Like, I have a 5-year-old right now. That's how old I was when my dad passed. And so it's really hard for me to speak. I've had to do a lot of reflection about how I have felt about my childhood, I think, and not to get super deep here, but one of the things that it has made me as a better mom is that it is important to be present with my kids, and that is the number one thing that I prioritize. Could I be better about it? Absolutely, I could be better about it, and that is why when I start to notice myself not being present because I'm so overstimulated or distracted or whatever it is, that's when I have to take a step back and say, "Catherine, you gotta get your shit together here," because being present when you are with your kids, for me, is very important because I did not have that.
Definitely. And I think I can kind of relate to that as well. My mom was very into work and she worked in an environment where, I mean, she's always been a social worker working for ultimately like the greater good of the people. And so she's always found a lot of identity in that. And that weaves itself into the way in which she operates within her everyday life. And it's a beautiful, amazing thing. It makes her very special. And she's really helped shape so many people's lives. But When I look back on my own childhood, I spent a lot of time with my dad because his schedule was a lot more flexible. Like he picked me up, he drove me to school. He was the default parent in my environment. And so I think for a long time, like I really kind of, especially after having kids, I held a lot of resentment against my own mom for that because I was like, I don't know how to operate in the mom in which I want to be, which is the total selfless mom, the one who's like not paying attention to my own needs. But now, as we're having this conversation, and I've thought this before, just not in the same way, I do like appreciate that now.
So let's get practical. This is the part where we give you some tangible takeaways because everything we've talked about is important, but we want you to walk away from this with something that you can actually use, not just like talk about Mayan and Leah's trauma dumping session. But these are just some starting points that we hope are very helpful for you. So we're just going to read through them and then we'll wrap it up. So, number one, get clear on what costs you energy and what restores it. Before you can set a boundary about something, you have to know what's actually draining you. This sounds really obvious, but most of us, we just move so fast. We're on autopilot. We've never like really stopped to analyze it. So spend a week just noticing. And after this interaction, do I feel lighter? Do I feel heavier? After this commitment, do I feel energized or do I feel depleted? That data, that's like a good starting point. And when you do this, don't judge anything. Don't judge what you find, just notice. And maybe it's something that's supposed to be good for you, like a certain friendship or family obligation. The noticing like isn't a verdict. It's really just information.
Number two, practice the small no first. You don't start with the biggest, hardest, most loaded boundary that you need to set. We're not cutting people out of our lives right away, right? You got to start small. Say no to something low stakes, decline an invitation you don't want to go to. Don't respond to a text the second it comes in. Let someone else handle something. Practice the muscle when the weight is light before you lift the heavy thing because saying no really is a skill. And like any skill, you build it through repetition. Every small no makes the next one just a little bit less scary.
And if I can say no as often as I do now, if you guys knew me, gosh, even 5 years ago, I was like the biggest yes girl, so much FOMO if I wasn't included in something. Now we've talked about JOMO, the joy of missing out, and like that is my identity. So if I can learn to do it and practice that muscle, I know that you definitely can too. So, number three, name the boundary to yourself before you name it to anyone else. This one changed everything for me. Before I have a hard conversation, I get really clear internally on what I'm actually asking for. What does this boundary look like in practice? What am I willing to do if it isn't respected? What is the actual need underneath all of it? Because a boundary that lives only in your head as a vague feeling like this isn't okay, it's really hard to communicate that with someone else. And so for me personally, especially if I am about to have a difficult conversation with someone, you better believe, and Leah knows this about me, I sit with this shit in my head for probably weeks, probably too long. I sit with it internally. I'm working on not doing that, but really getting clarity about what it is you need and the expectation from it versus just being vague about it.
I think that even goes back into what we talked about a while ago about getting more in touch with feelings and being able to really name things in your head. I think there's so much validity to that because it definitely takes away some of the power and brings clarity. So, number four, expect some discomfort, but don't take that as a sign to quit. When you start setting boundaries with people who you aren't used to having them with, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be guilt. There's going to be that little voice that says, this isn't worth it. Guys, that's totally normal. It's not necessarily a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something new. The discomfort really is the cost of the transition, not the cost of the boundary itself. It gets easier, it really does, but you have to get through it the first few times to find that out.
Number five, check in with yourself once a day. Just one question. How am I doing right now? What do I need today? It can be 30 seconds in the shower, a minute in your car, but the habit of checking in with yourself, actually asking and actually listening to yourself. You can ask the question, but give yourself a little bit of time to actually sit with it. That is what builds the self knowledge that makes boundaries possible in the first place, because you can't protect your peace if you don't know what disrupts it. And you can't know what disrupts it if you never slow down enough to feel it.
Number 6, let the boundary be enough without over explaining it. This is a huge one, and this is one that I struggle with a lot. I feel the need to come into these situations and just almost like trauma dump, word vomit situation to kind of justify why I'm making the choice that I'm making. But at the end of the day, you don't have to do that. The thing is that when we're not used to setting boundaries, we tend to over justify them. We give 5 reasons, we apologize, we make sure the other person isn't upset. We all of a sudden start taking on the responsibility for their feelings that we should never have to hold in the first place. And what that does is it all actually undermines the boundary because it communicates that your needs require a defense. A boundary is a complete sentence. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I need some time before I respond to this. You don't owe anyone a full explanation for protecting yourself. And while it's such a hard thing to actually practice, it really is so worth it.
Yes, could not agree more. Okay, so before we close, I just want to sit in this for a minute because I think sometimes we need someone to say out loud what we already know, but we haven't let ourselves believe yet. But your peace is worth protecting. That is not a selfish statement. It's not a statement that means you don't love the people in your life or that your relationships don't matter. It is just true. And you are allowed to have an inner life that belongs to you. You are allowed to have an energy at the end of the day, which, if you're a mom, I mean, I don't have a lot of energy at the end of the day, but you know what I mean. You are allowed to exist as a full person and not just a function for everyone else around you.
And the women who do this work, who do the uncomfortable thing of actually setting and keeping limits, they are not harder to love. They are easier because they show up as themselves, because they're not running on resentment, because they've stopped bleeding quietly and hoping nobody notices.
Totally. The version of you that protects her peace is not less generous. You're more present, more real, more available in the ways that actually matter.
And if you're at the very beginning of this, if you don't even know where to start, if the idea of saying no to someone important feels completely impossible right now, that's totally okay. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to start noticing, willing to ask the question, willing to treat yourself like someone whose needs matter.
Because they do, and they always have. And we're not experts here by any means. Like Leah and I are definitely still figuring this out in real time as well. And we're in your corner. If you, I don't know, I want to like tell someone if they're like, I don't even know where to start with this or anything like this. I want to be like, reach out to me. Like, let's chat, which you can totally do if you want, because Leah and I officially have a Before We Get It Right Instagram account. So
Whoop, whoop.
we have a place to connect. Substack wasn't, I don't know, it's not working out for us right now. It seems like too much energy to like pour into that platform.
It's basically like a blog. And guys, keeping up a blog in 2026 is so much harder than keeping up socials that you already do
Yeah,
day to
to do
day.
it like authentically too. Yeah, not working out, but you can find us on Instagram at Before We Get It Right. And thank you so much. We will see you next week.
Until next time.